If there's any questions that you have during this conversation, feel free to throw them in the chat box. We will answer them as we go. I just want to start this off. I'm Terra Lopez. I'm the community manager and head of artist partnerships at Backline. For those that don't know me, we have a very special fireside chat with the SONA Foundation. As most of you probably know, Backline is a resource hub for the music industry, and we aim to provide the industry with as many tools and resources as possible to support mental health and wellness. We've teamed up with the SONA Foundation, a nonprofit community-centered arts organization that is dedicated to providing mental health, financial well-being, career development, and emergency funding for songwriters and creators for this very special fireside chat to talk about mental health for songwriters, specifically creating through grief and loss. Today, we have some incredible guests. We have certified clinical psychologist, singer, songwriter, and filmmaker, Dr. Eanah. Eanah has over 13 years of clinical and forensic experience, specializing in mental health and well-being, depression, anxiety, PTSD, parenting and family dynamics, and much, much more. She has found healing after personal tragedies through creating music, and we're going to explore that and much more. Very excited to have you, Dr. Eanah. We also have artist, songwriter, performer, musician, Scott Simons. Scott's voice has been heard by nearly every child and parent as the voice of the theme of Nickelodeon's Paw Patrol. He's also traveled the world as a touring musician for over a decade. He's been the assistant music director on America's Got Talent for 13 plus years and has worked with an incredible amount of highly talented singer-songwriters throughout the decade. Thank you so much, Scott, for joining us. We also have artist, songwriter, yoga teacher, and coordinator for the SONA Foundation, Arielle Silber. And lastly, we have Backline case manager and also our host facilitator of Backline's grief support group, Waves, Brad Cole. Brad is an invaluable member of the Backline team and specializes in grief and loss. So I think it's a perfect fit for today's conversation. Arielle is going to be moderating the chat box, so please feel free to drop any questions that you might have there, and we'll make sure to get to them throughout the conversation today. All right, so we are talking about how to create through grief and loss and how to cope with the many emotions that that can all bring. So very, very excited to have this conversation with you all. First off, I guess I just want to ask, how's everyone doing today? It's Halloween. How's everyone feeling today?
I'm feeling good.
Awesome.
I feel like I'm trying to avoid Halloween. I'm just sort of like, it's too much happening. There's too much happening everywhere all at once, and I just kind of want to avoid Halloween this year. I don't know why.
Yeah, I don't need to welcome any more spookiness into my space right now, I don't think.
That is so fair and so valid and very much felt. So I get that. Well, we're talking about grief and loss today. There's obviously a lot of that going on in the world and in our day to day. So I want to thank you all for being here and for helping us figure this out, how to create through experiencing grief and loss, how to heal, and also what to do if we're feeling stuck in that grief and loss. And also talking about creativity, which is always fun. So I guess I'll start off first. Eanah and Scott, you both wear many different hats in and outside of the industry. I'm wondering if you would be open in sharing some of the struggles that you've either personally faced as just being both front-facing folks in the industry as well as songwriters. Yeah, so I don't know, Eanah, if you'd like to start it off.
Sure. So I am very new to the industry. I've only actually stepped into my own as a songwriter within the past year or two. Prior to that, the bulk of my experience has been clinical as a clinical psychologist, and grief and loss was sort of my entry into tapping more into my creativity as a way to heal. So in my short time in the industry, I have, noticed that interpersonally, I tend to get a little overwhelmed with a lot of the personalities and the energy and some of the different types of people I've encountered. not that anyone's a bad person, but it's definitely a different culture. It's a different culture. And it can sort of make you feel like, gosh, do I look good enough? Am I, like my sweater was good enough when I was doing therapy, but now I'm writing songs, and kind of make you question yourself, self-esteem, things like that, in an industry that focuses a lot on appearances and things that are maybe sometimes more superficial. I can see how someone could maybe get lost in that.
Absolutely. And then Scott, you've been in the industry for 13 plus years. So what are some of your personal struggles within the industry as a songwriter and as a performer?
Well, I was just going to add to what Eanah said a little bit, that like so much of songwriting and being in rooms with people is navigating personalities, right? And managing the vibe in the room. Like that's almost 50% of being creative, is like the finding the right people to vibe with and the people you trust. My experience coming to LA to be a songwriter was that they just my publisher put me in rooms with so many people, and it's like shock every day, where you just like with someone else, you get a coffee, you tell your life story over and over, the same story every day, and then you got to write a song. And hopefully get it done by the end of the day, and if not, then you got to try to find time to have another session. And at a certain level, so many people in this town, or in this industry, not just this town, are so talented that it does come down to like, who do you vibe with? Who do you trust? Who can you share your really crappy ideas until you get to the good ones, So I think that's a big part of it. For me personally, I've actually been in bands and doing this since like 20 years old, and I'm 47 now. So it's been a long time. I think for me personally, my biggest struggle is financial stability, if I'm being 100% honest, and even accepting that in the last few years, when I have been more financially stable, accepting that that's even going to continue and not having anxiety about it. It's something that comes up a lot with like, what if this isn't happening in 6 months? What if this isn't happening in a year? And that's, especially in a town like LA where I'm based, it's just increasingly expensive. And then the economy of songwriting and music industry just bottoming out, and ways to make money, and where the money's going to the wrong entities, So it's like, for me, that financial insecurity seeps into so many other things. It seeps into your confidence as a writer. It seeps into your confidence in your interpersonal relationships outside of music. So that would probably be my number one thing.
Arielle, as a songwriter as well, does any of that resonate with you as to some of what you personally struggle with?
Yeah. Scott, what you just said about financial stability, I had to grab my notebook and make a note to myself that, for the SONA Foundation and Backline partnership in this mental health for songwriters, we've got to do a session on exactly that topic, on the mental health part of the instability, the financial instability. But also you said, you tell your personal story over and over again. And I something about that really hit a nerve for me, because as craftspeople writing our songs, and for me, I'm a performing singer-songwriter, so I'm telling stories I think of it as the white space between the songs when I'm on stage. And, so the stories become crafted, and the songs are crafted. And even, I think that I'm finding that, you dig deep to extract the truth and express it in an artful way. And in that way, it creates its own shield. So after the show is over, when you're just, having personal conversations with people, it's like, once you have that kind of crafted version of the narrative, sometimes it can be hard to dive back deep into it to, kind of, I guess, address some of the other stuff that hasn't been addressed yet, or just the real feelings behind the narrative of it. Those are some challenges that I think, especially right now, I'm sitting in a hotel room in Virginia. I'm on tour right now. And, I think that that's sort of something that's top of my mind at the moment while I'm in the middle of that.
Well, I think, isn't there like a certain, like the best performers and the best creators, best writers are vulnerable, but there has to be boundaries to your vulnerability, like what you really want to share and what you're comfortable sharing. And so like we all struggle with that. Like, I want to be open, but I don't know if this is the right room for that, or I don't know if this is the right space for that. And I want to be this, but I don't know if that's rubs against someone else's experience. And so you just have to, navigating that all the time, every day, it can be heavy,
Yeah, absolutely. Good question, Terra, to start us off.
Yeah, well, Scott actually just touched on something that I want to ask each of you is knowing the boundaries. How, especially we're talking about grief and loss today. How do you find that balance as a songwriter and performer between channeling your grief into music and maintaining your emotional well-being at the same time? Like, how do you decide on, I'm going to share this personal experience with those around me? Or is that something that you even think about? Eanah, how are you? You're nodding your head.
Just kind of thoughts are formulating. So for me, the very first song I wrote was very personal. I wrote a song about my experience of losing my daughter, which happened in 2012. I never intended to share the song. I wrote it as sort of a way to heal. I wrote it, I was like, this is great. I started listening to it every day. It was kind of like an affirmation for me. And I was led to share it because when I let other people hear it, it helped them too, because it's specific to me, but it was universal enough that other people, because we all experience loss. If we haven't, we will. It's sort of the one thing that's kind of promised if you live a long life. So the decision to share it and to sing it, that is the only song that I'm actually singing because it came from my heart. So the songs that decision was not a hard one. But I have written songs since then. It kind of opened the floodgates for me of this new area of songwriting that is like the light of my life right now. But I'm not writing other songs about grief. That was kind of the one. All my other songs are about love and hope and the universe and the ocean, and the other things I'm interested in. So I think for me, the boundary is that this specific song on this specific topic is special and unique. I'm not going to make a career out of writing songs about loss and death and dying, if that makes sense. Because my grief doesn't completely define me. There are other parts, and I'm able to express all of those when I write songs.
I love that. Scott, how are you? Is there a boundary for you in regards to when you write?
First of all, I think the thing about people that experience like profound loss is we all have that in common, but you also can't even fathom someone else's loss. And so I'm very sorry for your loss, Eanah. I can't imagine that. But I think for me, what I've found, and it's like part of like just going through it all, is the grief is always there. I don't mean that I'm always sad. I'm not. I think that I am mostly joyful and try to be funny and enjoy things and find the humor in situations. But my grief is like, it's like my arm, it's just like a part of my body. And when I was younger, I lost my dad at 20, and he was like everything to me. I mean, my mom too, obviously, but my dad was like, he was like a creative nerd and just lived his life creatively and just went on 11 all the time. Figuratively and literally, because he was a weatherman, so he went on at 11, but he also was on 11 all the time. He was but the thing for me is that like when I try to write something like head on, like about the loss, for me personally, it comes off trite and it comes off a little too on the nose. But if I can get at it at a different angle as a writer, or even something as simple as like I've written a lot about breakups, romantic breakups, but in the course of romantic breakups, we're making a choice to keep someone in our life after the breakup, or we're not. And that's a choice I didn't have when I lost my dad. So like everything kind of is compared to that. And it's almost like grief is this part of me that I hold in front of me, and I'm constantly learning about, studying, and how it seeps into other areas of my life. But I think like when you're creating, it's whether you're really conscious of it or not, it's there because it's your perspective and it is who you are. And so like maybe grief isn't everything that I am, but it is like such a big part. And for me, I can't extricate myself from the fact that that's happened, and that how that has just changed how I view everything. And that comes out in your creativity and lyrically and musically. And you know, if I'm happy, that's the opposite side of the coin of grief. And so like my happiness is always going to be compared to that, whether that's, I don't find that sad. I find that like a comfort. So
that really resonates. I'm a songwriter myself and a performer, and I lost my father to suicide about 8 years ago. And for the first like 3 or 4 years, one, the trauma of that, I physically lost my voice for a year. And then once I was able to kind of get back into singing and performing, trying to sit down and write about this massive experience and all of the emotions. I wrote just like terrible stuff for quite a while. Nothing really, I couldn't sit down and actually write something that I loved about that experience. And so that definitely resonates. It took a long time to kind of, experience life with this new loss and kind of understand myself in many different cycles in order to finally be able to even approach the topic in songwriting. And even then it did have to be a bit more abstract for me. I want to know and this is open for everyone, in what ways does the act of creating music help you process and cope with grief and loss? Eanah, you said that you listen to your song on a daily basis as sort of an affirmation. What did that do for you?
For me, so writing the song, and I love what you said, that you couldn't do it right away. So I was not a songwriter, although if I look back, I've always been a songwriter because I've always kind of been composing musicals in my head, even as a child. But I was a psychologist, right? And I had this awful thing happen. So for 10 years, I leaned into what I knew. I went to therapy. I took medication. I did all the things that the book said I was supposed to do. But for me, when I took the songwriting class, I made a step to take a songwriting class. And we went through this process of tapping in. It was really spiritual, kind of tapping into our chakras and really thinking about what is it that I'm still struggling with. Like, it's been 10 years, this has happened and there's no timeline, but where am I stuck? Because I felt stuck. Once I figured that out and I wrote the song and I started to play it kind of rewired my brain. I don't know how to exactly put it, but because the words came from my heart and I wrote them, and it wasn't that a therapist told me, you need to do XYZ. It was a personal realization. And I would sing the song. So I have this brand called Healing by Singing. And I thought that because I know what happens in the brain when you sing, the chemicals, I know the psychological benefits of singing. And it dawned on me one day that with the song, it's not what healed me wasn't singing it. It was the fact that I wrote it. It was the fact that I wrote it and that it was from my heart. And then I listened to it every day. And it just kind of reminded me of, the meaning that I found in the song was not really straight on, like, gosh, I'm sad you died. Kind of like you're saying, Scott, it was more like, I accepted the fact that this person I loved and lost is not really gone. So when they're only gone from their body was the conclusion I came to. So when I listen to the song, it just reminds me every day, you're sad, you're hurt. You can't see her, but she's still there. So I think, I don't know. I say all the time that there's no timeline on grief. You can't tell somebody when you're supposed to start to feel better. I started healing 10 years after it happened because I wrote a song. And that was just so powerful for me, which is why I, kind of quit stopping it. It's my pedestal now.
I don't think there's any substitute for like real therapy and really like addressing things and studying yourself, but I for one have a therapist and am in therapy, and that's something new for me within the last few years, which has been very beneficial. But I will say the benefit we have as musicians is that like being able to write a song is baked in therapy into your existence. Like, how lucky are we that we get to, first of all, like everyone will sing things they would never say, and they would sing things in a way they would never say it. So just having that outlet, we're so lucky. You know, I don't know what it would be like to have such profound grief, carry it with you, and then not know how to get it out, you know, and where to put it. So I think that that's such an important thing. I've found that like writing, and maybe I'm veering off the question, so I'll shut up if that's the case, but I found that like writing for me specifically, and this kind of goes back to what I was saying before, like when early on, well, okay, I would say this, like grief morphs, I've found as I've gotten older, and it just changes. And like that immediate feeling of just like the rug pulled out from under you and that shock, that heals and goes away. But like what's left behind just keeps changing. And so like the ability to have music to express that change, and also to have that grief to give you the material to write about, is like such a gift. So that's one way to analyzing can help. And I think, yeah, I think what I found when I write, especially lyrically, is like the more specific I am to my experience, somehow it has more universality to the listener. I don't know what that paradox is called, or what paradigm. I don't know the difference between paradox and paradigm, if I'm being 100% honest. I don't know why that is, but I found that if I write songs that are like about the way my handwriting reminds me of my dad's sometimes, as opposed to I just wish you were here, there's something about the specificity that just hits more people. And I don't know why that is, because you'd think that like everybody wishes someone was here. That should be, you know?
Yeah.
And I guess people like, for me, one of the best songs about grief is Fix You by Coldplay, and it has a universality to it without any real specificity. So I don't know if people can navigate that, but for me, I've found that like the more specific I can be, not just in my songwriting, but just writing or speaking about my dad, if I can tell you something really specific about him, it hits a little harder, and I don't know why.
I think it's that that vulnerability, right? It's the you opening up about your specific experience or your specific memories of your father will no doubt resonate with others and kind of make them reflect on their own relationships and losses. And so I think that vulnerability is just so powerful, obviously in songwriting, but even more so in our day-to-day interactions with individuals. Arielle, are there any specific, and Scott, you mentioned this as well. I'd like to know if there's any specific musical or lyrical techniques you use to try to convey the complex emotions that are associated with grief and loss in your songs. Scott, you mentioned, getting specific down to the handwriting, phrase rather than the general, I wish you were here. I'm just trying to think for those listening in, if you're sitting here with this immense grief, which is where I was a few years ago, are there any advice or any ways that you personally would go into the studio or go into your space and tell folks, try this, or this helped me out to get past whatever emotion that they were feeling in the moment?
Terra, you used the word earlier in the conversation, massive. You said it was so massive. And I think that that's the, it's like you try to wrap your arms around something and it's just too massive. And a song is 3 minutes, give or take. And, grief and loss and other emotions that are that big, it's like you can't wrap your head around it. So I think that, or wrap your heart around it. It's like, it's just too massive. It's too big. And so I think that, for me, I always, when I'm overwhelmed by the size, the largeness of something, I try to go in that exact opposite direction and get really, really small, start from the minute. And Scott, you mentioned, the handwriting, like something so small and specific. And I don't know if this is the reason why when we're more specific, it has more universal power, but perhaps it's because we humans have an understanding of metaphor. And so when one person says, my dad's handwriting, the other person hears that as metaphor for the thing in their life, that symbol that can stand in for something else. And we automatically, create these bridges between someone else's experience and our own experience. And when we're trying to write about a massive thing and we're talking about it in general terms, it doesn't create that metaphor bridge. It doesn't help that. Emily Dickinson, the poet, she wrote, "Tell all the truth, but tell it slant." And maybe it's a little bit like that, where you can't just go head on with this massive thing. You have to kind of enter somewhere. And so, when it comes to songwriting or literary writing or conversation, maybe sometimes you're just overwhelmed with this massive house of grief, and you just have to kind of crawl around at the edges and find that crack in the window or the open door, or something to try to enter that house, and then just start from that room that you entered, wherever that happens to be, and then explore from that point forward.
I feel like I'm getting the benefit of hearing you guys react to the question immediately, and very, very well. And then I get to think of my thoughts while you guys are answering. So if at any point you want to hit the Uno reverse card and make me answer first, I don't want to put you guys on the spot. Like, as soon as you hear the question, you got to answer it. But everything you guys are saying is so profound that it gives me so much material to say when it's my turn to speak. But I was going to say that, I guess the advice for writing through grief is not that much different than just writing in general. But I think that one thing that can help someone be creative through grief is to really listen to how you speak about it, and really listen to the conversations that you're having, because your lyrics are in there and how you really feel are in your conversation. Instead of to me, there's two phases of songwriting. There's the collection phase, and then there's the editing phase. And during the collection phase, we need to pay attention to other works of art and movies and film, and our conversations and our daily interactions and our feelings, check in with ourselves. And then the editing phase is more okay, now I'm going to censor out and find the good rhymes and the really juicy stuff, right? And so during the collection phase, I think you really need to listen to what you're saying and what you're feeling, and put that down. Don't try to make it rhyme. Don't try to make it poetic. Don't try to make it rhythmic or melodic. Just get it out, because that's the truth is right there. And that goes for all songwriting. So I think that's the biggest advice I would give.
I love that. I love, one, like you said, Arielle, getting small, starting small. And then, Scott, as you were saying, really focus and dial in on the conversations that you're actually having, because that is where the truth is. Eanah, you said that it took about 10 years after your loss to be able to sit down and write about it. Do you remember at all the process of that, or how that experience was for you?
Yeah, I do. You said something, Scott, a little earlier that's kind of been resonating with me, that we can sing things that we maybe won't say. On those lines, I might be misquoting, but at the time I decided to write the song, it was around the 10-year mark of the loss. And I was still kind of on this, what I would call search for meaning. I've done therapy, and like you said, it changes, right? That shock rug pulled out from under me, that's gone. I've compartmentalized. I've had 2 more children. I'm living kind of a different life almost, but it never, I still wanted to know why. I had this lingering question of why, and I was really, really stuck. So I started making a film, a documentary, kind of talking to people. Hey, it's been 10 years, her best friend on her soccer team. Hey, you were 14 and your best friend died. You're 24 now. What's that been like for you? Trying to find out what it had been like for other people. And in that process, it started bringing up a lot of stuff. And I was like, oh, crap, I'm not okay. So I was literally scrolling Instagram one day, and an artist, her name is Mumu Fresh. I really admire her. She had a songwriting class. It said a therapeutic songwriting class. I was like, let me try it, right? Click, let me try it. Life-changing. In the very first class, kind of like what you, both of you, Scott and Arielle, mentioned, I was able to identify exactly where and why I was stuck. Melody, I was stuck because I couldn't grasp the fact that my loved one no longer existed. That was where I was stuck. and my spiritual beliefs had undergone a huge change. And back, so I write it, I still have the notebook. I just wrote the words. I wrote the words. I didn't think about melody. I didn't think about cadence. I just wrote the words and I got them out. I almost feel like the song wrote itself. I know I wrote it, but I almost feel like it wrote itself. And from there, I was in LA and I was with a friend, with Stevie Mackey, and he made a piano melody for me and it became a song. But the process in and of itself, I really feel like it just unfolded. The song was, and I'll also say this, I was able to express things in that song that I was not able to express about the kind of pain and I was going through to people, because people view me as very strong. I'm the strong person in my family and my circle. And I don't know, I don't know. The song wrote itself.
When a song needs to come out, you can't really stop it. You just have to kind of like be the conduit to get it out. There was something you said that resonated with, I was going to say that, change in spirituality, that happened to me too, not like but like in any way that can be a kind of loss too, because that's so much of people's identity is their spirituality, and then to have something like that just upend it can be part of the loss and part of the grief. I had a similar experience where I couldn't write about it for a long time. The first thing I did, like the month after my dad passed away, I was 20 years old. I wrote a song called 49 because that's how old he was. And it was very literal. It's a little cringy. But, if I look at it through the lens of a 20-year-old, I'm like, wow, this is heavy, that I was trying to process this. The next song I wrote was like 9 years later, and it was a song literally called Specific Things. And it was about the specific things I remember. And that's cringy too. It's just like, it's way too, right? The last song I've only written 3 in 26 years that are directly about him. It's almost too sacred of a topic for me to just write a song directly about. But I wrote one called Foot of the Stairs, and it was a little more metaphorical, and I'm a little more proud of it because it was like, you walked me up to the foot of the stairs and told me I should climb. And then that was like more of like for something. And then within that, I have this specificity in the verses, but the chorus was this more. And I feel like, I hope, like if you write one song in 10 years that is about, I hope in 10 years it would be a completely different song that you wrote about, because we grow and that grief morphs in the way that we contextualize it and we mature. Like for me, I'm 47 now. So just think, if I wrote a song called 49 now, it would be very different than a 20-year-old writing it, right? It's like, wow, I'm creeping up on that number, and it never seemed old to me. It felt way too soon and way too young, but now it feels especially young and way too soon, so I would have a different, I could probably write that same title 100% different way now.
Mm. I teach a course at a local Los Angeles university called Sources of Creativity, and my students just had their midterm project yesterday. So last night they were delivering their midterm presentations, and for this course on creativity, I asked them to explore their own however that manifests in their own life, and every student is different. And this one student presented a book that she wrote, a children's book that's sort of like a fairy tale. There once was a girl named, and it was a name similar to hers, but not exactly hers. And it was like there once was a girl named so-and-so, and she wandered into the land of light and met this person who ended up going through darkness. And over the course of this book, which was quite lengthy and in third person, never me, but this other fairy tale character, her mother, has mental health issues, her fiance dies, and her child, she has a late-term miscarriage. And she talks about all these layers of deep sadness and grief and loss. And it's this third-person arm's distance kind of thing. And it's the only, she explained when she was presenting it that this was the only time that she has ever written about these stories and gotten it out there. And Scott, as you're talking about your evolution with these 3 songs that you wrote, I was thinking, there are layers of it. And sometimes, maybe you look back later and you think, oh, that's cringy, or you look back and you say, oh, I'm very proud of it. But either way, it's like the way that you would write about it when it's new or it's the first time you've written about it is going to be different than the way that you write about it later. And maybe you write about it more arm's length the first time, third person, it's not me, it's her, and then you bring it into first person or second person or fairy tale. We always use different devices when we're writing. Like, what are the rules of this song, and what's the device that what is the rhyme scheme, what is the the melodic motif, and what's the device. It's almost like those things are sort of scaffolding that hold us up, that give us some kind of support. Like the structure of the song can be strong enough to support the structure of the story. In the case of my student, it can be strong enough sometimes to hold the weight of a very heavy topic.
And we only are where we are, really. I mean, whenever you're writing a song, you have to be a little bit nice to yourself and be like, listen, I'm sure I could write a better song than this, but I am where I am today. I am where I am this year in my life. And like, this is my perspective. And you have to have that, like, you have to just be a snapshot of where you are in that moment, especially when you're dealing with something like grief that's going to keep changing and give you new perspective. So, like I can be kind to my 20-year-old self, and I can actually look at it and be like, wow, like that's a lot to process at that age, But I could also just be like, but that's a shitty chorus. I would write a better pre-chorus or something.
Well, it's funny how, as the professional songwriter, you're looking back and you're kind of critiquing it through the lens of that now. But, even as you're talking about it, and when you were talking about it a couple of minutes ago, even though you use the word cringy, I was actually just thinking, wow, that's so beautiful that was one of the ways that you were using to process this.
I was thinking the same thing, that even if no one ever heard that song, the act of writing it, the physical and the healing benefits, getting it out. I think that's awesome that you did that at 20, cringy or not.
It's a little too jazzy for me, to be honest.
Brad, I want to ask you, as someone who facilitates our Backline's grief support group every week, and you hear from folks often that, how grief impacts one's day-to-day. What are some common reactions and emotions that people may experience when dealing with grief and loss, and how do those reactions vary?
Yeah. Well, first I would say, I think the metaphor of the house was so beautiful, Arielle, because like it is so unique for everybody. And I think that, like, thinking of common experiences can be challenging because, grief is something that we as a society don't have. We're bad at it. I'll just say it. And we try to kind of push it away, show will go on, and then it gets into the industry, can get even more big. So yeah, it's unique for every single person. I think some of the common reactions I hear is like, I got to get back into it quick, or I'm worried what people are going to think. The judgment of songs created through grief is there. Like, is this going to be any good? And one I think that shows up a lot for folks that can be a strange one is anger, just like anger and how to like channel that through artistic creation. But a lot of what y'all have already said in terms of like your experience is kind of common, I guess, as we can get. But I think the struggle mostly is like, how am I going to get back into this? Like, how am I going to get back into writing music, performing, doing what I want to do? Am I going to be good again? Who am I going to be after this? Which I've kind of heard all of y'all touch on this. And one that really came up, or like, I know we were talking about kind of financial instability before we got into talking about grief, but that's also a big one is, I mean, you have to write and perform to make money. And when you're in a state of deep mourning, it can be quite impossible, or putting that stress on yourself to continue to create. So I've often found that actually the like pressure that can come from the industry is something that can actually create like impact in a negative way, that creative flow in the beginning, kind of, what you were saying, Scott, of like, you got to be ready to move through it. You can't just rugs ripped out and you're right back into it. So try to pack all my thoughts kind of in there at once, but yeah.
I was gonna add to what you said that, like, I don't know if this is too inside baseball, but if there are like songwriters, creators watching, like, one thing about even something that seems simple like anger, to write through anger, there's many ways to express anger, right? Like, just think about when your parents were angry at you. The one that there was the one that could yell at you, and there was the one that was just like quiet, and both are effing scary, right? So like within music, there's the anger of like "F you, I won't do what you tell me" by Rage Against the Machine, not the title but the lyric. And then there's also like Johnny Cash singing "Hurt" by Nine Inch Nails, which is just so quiet and subtle, and it's just like, oh my god, there's anger there. There's beyond among a lot of other emotions. So I think like even something as simple as happiness, or something as simple as anger, or something, it's like, or like I said earlier, like happiness, yeah, but happiness compared to this grief that's never, it's never going to go away. So that's already a complicated thing to try to express in 3 minutes and make it rhyme and make it catchy. That's a lot.
Yeah, I think that part of it too, of just like, you can't just like make it go away. I appreciate you talking about how it shows up in different ways. I think that's like spot on. It never goes away. We just learn how to grow with it, and it's ever changing. And I think that's when I hear a lot too of like, I just want it over with. I want it out of my life. I want to get back to work, want to get back to life. And that's just never going to happen. It has to be kind of brought into your experience. And, unfortunately, we have to feel grief to experience the full human experience. So, yeah, it's one we can't just push away. We have to understand our own grief and how it shows up throughout the years.
Yeah.
Oh, no, please.
Like what you're saying, right? There are a lot of these sort of theories that are out there that people think, so, oh gosh, there are stages of grief. So I'm going to feel shock and anger. And it can give you this sort of misconception that there's a finish line. There's a point that you're going to get to where you've reached the end of grief. And I think that
Program, like a 12-step,
like, okay, I was angry, now I was in denial, and now there's acceptance, and for some people, when you don't get there, it can sort of not be compassionate to yourself and push yourself that you need to move forward. And I think a lot of the newer theories and models are kind of taking into account that it's not linear. That's the biggest things I had to learn. It's not a get through type thing. It is a live with. I will live with this reality. And that's very freeing, right? Because you don't feel like you're somehow not meeting some arbitrary grief marker. And being newer to the music industry, I can see that there could be pressure. Just speaking from what I've seen, to get back out there. Because guess what? There's maybe someone else might get this up, or someone younger, newer, better, so I could see how that could really inhibit someone from kind of taking the time that they need to just slow down a little bit. And it's realistic. That's actually could be a very realistic fear that someone has, that they may lose an opportunity.
Also, like, speaking of not being linear, you really can't control what you're going to feel about that on that. You could just wake. I know I have days where my best friend, I'll say to her, like, I'm having a dad day. And it's not his birthday, and it's not the anniversary of his death, and it's not Father's Day, and it's not it's just a Tuesday, and I woke up and I'm like, I feel like shit, and I'm just gonna have a dad day today. And you can't control chemically or emotionally like why it hit me that day. And so like to be able to create on one of those days, that could be empowering, and that can also be inhibiting. So like you don't know. So it's like you have to just accept that it's not linear, that it isn't like, oh, tomorrow will be better than today. Tomorrow might be shittier than today, how you feel about it, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
So I feel like not being non-linear is like a very important point.
I'm curious about Terra. Can I throw you a question? You mentioned that that after your dad died, you lost your voice. And, along the lines of what everybody's talking about right now, you were a songwriter, performer. So there was this secondary, I imagine there were some secondary emotions that were happening for you that weren't about your dad specifically, but about the fact that you lost your voice, and that this idea of your career as a musician. How did you move how did you like now you're not in that. You're really like, as I said before, your music is coming up on my release radar all the time. So clearly you found your voice, you're back to performing and you're recording and everything. So how did that happen from where you were to where you are now?
Yeah, the week my father passed away, I went on tour, and that was a really nice distraction. And it was, beautiful connecting with fans, and it kind of felt like this community. Everyone had my back during that time because I'm very open and vulnerable online about what I'm personally going through. And so that was really beautiful. But then when I got back home, I mean, already you got the post-tour blues that happen as is, on top of, oh, now I have to like actually deal with what has happened and what I'm going through. I had no idea that back then, I had no idea that trauma can physically affect you. And so I started feeling just off. Um, for 2 full years, I physically felt a ring around my head. It was like this immense pressure and pain, but nothing I did or took helped. There were all of these physical ailments that I would go and seek out doctors, and there was nothing physically on paper wrong with me. And then my voice. I have been a singer for almost 2 decades, and I really, prided myself on being a singer and rehearsing every day. And I just completely stopped being able to sing one day. It was all mental. There was absolutely nothing wrong with me physically, but because that's how my grief manifested, was something that I've always used to, work through trauma. My tool was singing, and somehow in my mind, I lost that tool. And so it was really, really scary, because now the thing that I used my entire life to kind of get through situations was no longer, it was no longer available. And the way that I got through that was I went and saw for the first time a vocal coach. And we didn't practice on like, here's the notes to sing. It was more, how does your body feel? How do you feel singing in your body? Let's kind of get back to the relationship of you and singing in your body. And so I saw a vocal coach for a year, and we just focused on the mental aspects of singing and the physicality of it versus the actual technical aspects. And it was life-changing for me. It really helped me see just kind of how it gave me grace and compassion for myself. I realized like, I'm not okay. My body is telling me I'm not okay. And I have to honor that. And I have to kind of pause. So I didn't tour for a full year. I didn't record. It was the first time that I just like stopped all out. And it I now have the tools to where if I sense something like that approaching, I know how to kind of, stamp that out.
Wild.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It was, it was just wild. It's wild how grief, like how we've all been saying, it never goes away. It is something that we really have to learn how to live with, how to carry. And there is that duality, because I don't know if y'all feel this way, but I often say my grief is a gift. I truly have learned so many more like layers of myself through experiencing loss. And in a way, I feel like I'm now able to show up for others who are inevitably going to experience loss and pain. I'm able to show up for them because I know like this is what I needed in that moment. So I think I can just be better for others in my life. I want to know, I know this conversation is amazing, by the way, I'm loving this. But we only have a few more minutes. And so I want to leave folks who are watching this or who will watch this on our YouTube channel. Brad, what strategies or coping mechanisms, healthy ones, of course, can folks use when navigating the grief process? As Eanah said, grief is not linear, healing is not linear. But what are some strategies that folks can take away from this?
Yeah. It's not a particular skill that's coming to mind, but really for me, my thoughts are around is learning how to take care of yourself, as you did, Terra, and like learning what your body needs, learning what you need when you're feeling like shit, when you're feeling really sad, when you're feeling angry, when you're feeling relief, all of it. Um, Learning how to take care of yourself. And I know this is a hard part of the industry, but finding space for yourself, even if it's a 30 minutes while you're in the back of the bus or 30 minutes before you sit down to write, like give yourself a moment to kind of give that space to reconnect with with your loved one or whatever the loss may be. And just being honest with yourself. I think pushing through grief, as we've been talking about, does not work. So listening to yourself, community is going to be huge, which I know I wanted to bring this in a little bit earlier. I know we're a little slower or low on time. But safe connection is so important. Grief often wants us to isolate, get away. We don't want to be the sad person. We don't want to be the person that brings people down. So it's so important to have community and find that safe connection. And even if it's one person, in our grief group, we always say you just need two people to have community. And so at least having two safe connections where you can go and know you're going to be held, not given ideas on like, try this, but just kind of held in your sadness, held in your grief, that depth of it. And not doesn't have to be physical holding, but just like holding space, someone who can hold the space for you to just be in your grief. That would be my biggest recommendation.
Do you all have any self-care strategies that you utilize on when you're feeling kind of overwhelmed, when that unexpected wave hits? Is there anything that helps you?
I have found over the years that being very transparent with people about what I need is helpful. When people don't know what to do, someone earlier said, like, they don't know what to do. They don't know what to say. And a lot of times things that are meant to be well-intentioned can be hurtful, can be not helpful, and sometimes actually hurtful. So I learned to sort of just be very specific, like, yes, you can drop off food. Yes, this is what I need right now. Here's where I need space. And finding, like you said, Brad, just a couple of people, because it's draining. So someone passes away, and what happens in like the first couple weeks? Everyone is there. There's a million casseroles. You're overwhelmed. Fast 6 months later, nobody's dropping off a casserole 6 months after a funeral, but that's probably when you might need it the most, a year after. So just communicating. And one thing I did was I identified a trusted person to kind of communicate on my behalf when it got really overwhelming. It was my sister, and we have a really big family, and she would kind of just filter out some stuff for me, so that I would not be overwhelmed. And the other thing I would add really quickly is that we talk a lot about how hard it is when you're grieving, but there are moments in grief where there's happiness, where there's joy, where you enjoy food, you laugh at a TV show, and it can be really hard for the person grieving to cope with. My loved one died 30 days ago. Why am I feeling happiness? But that's your body and your brain. You can't be in a constant state of pain and grief. Your body and your brain will give you a break. It will sort of compartmentalize and allow you to enjoy life. So I always encourage people who are going through it, don't beat yourself up for having a happy moment in the midst of your sadness. That is self-care. Enjoy it and take it in. And it does not mean that you don't care about the person. And I think it's hard for me. And I think that was one of the biggest forms of self-care, was not equating my happy moments with not loving my loved one.
Also, like, we all experience it differently and react to it differently. And so I remember when my dad first passed away, like, I don't know if I really leaned in and really felt it. And if someone outside of me that had never experienced that kind of grief would look at me like, is that how someone who's sad acts? But I was 20 and it was the summer after my junior year of college. So I was still like trying to have some normalcy in my life. My friend just has a 7-year-old and just lost his wife. She was 42 or so around there. And they're like, this summer they went and took trips and she just passed away. But that's what grief looks like. Like, people that haven't been through it don't know. And also what you said is so true. People don't know what to say. Like, you know, when people say, "Oh, God only gives us so much we can handle," it's like, well, let me be the judge of what I can handle. You know, it's like, I don't like when people say, well, if you hadn't gone through that experience, you might not have had the success you had. It's like, I would give up everything for another 24 hours with my dad, like 100%. And yes, I agree that grief is a gift, but that's a process to get to that. And the kind of gift we mean is not that. It's not that. I would trade everything in for another conversation with my dad, or to just have the opposite be the reality. So I feel like, that's when I get like really, it's like, but you have to give people grace too, that they just, if you haven't been through it, or when, you know, I'm sure that other people that have lost parents, you'll be like, when you see a friend or someone, you know, talk badly about or to their parents, you're just like, it drives you crazy, you know, because so it's like, but you have to give people grace that they don't have that experience. Yes. So they can't possibly understand it.
Right. I just want to thank you so much, Eanah, for saying, like, you know, you need to give yourself permission to experience all of the many emotions, because that definitely resonated with me. I remember, you know, like I said, the week my father passed away, I went on tour and I met with fans, and there were moments of pure happiness on stage, and also of just like connecting with folks who like your music. And I remember kind of beating myself up in the moment, like, I should be sad this entire time, I should be crying, I should be upset. And it's only now, you know, years later, where I realized, like, no, there's so many dualities to who we are as individuals, and grief is no different. It's expressed and felt, and Scott, like you said, you know, you felt it much later, and there's no right or wrong. But the thing is, you do have to feel it at one point or another. You have to walk through that and experience it full on. I know it's 2:00, so I want to, you know, be mindful and respectful of everyone's time, but I just want to thank you all for having this incredible conversation. I think it was much needed, and it's going to resonate with a lot more folks as well. We're going to post this on our YouTube channel, so we'll be able to share it with our communities. So for those watching, please visit backline.care if you need help. All of our resources are free. We have a free case management program. We have free virtual support groups and exclusive wellness offers. Please go to the SONA Foundation for more resources on mental health, well-being, financial wellness, like we were just talking about, and much, much more. We're going to be back next month. And please also follow our incredible guests, Dr. Eanah, Scott Simons. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your stories, your vulnerability. This is it's been amazing talking with you all.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Thank you, Terra, for leading the conversation, and Brad for always bringing in that side of it. And Scott and Dr. Eanah, thank you so much for being here. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you all.
And so, Terra, I guess that's the end of it. So you can stop the recording. And I always feel like there's this moment where I just want to have like the post conversation.